Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. @KidCunny on Twitter. What's going on today, buddy?
Not too much. I was doing some freelance articles I texted you about the fall, or I guess winter high school sports are concluding, and so I was writing up some basketball articles and just push into my point that seeding matters, and no matter what coaches tell you in the NCAA tournament, once the selection show gets revealed and everything happens, coaches do care about seeding. It's not completely about matchups. Of course, once you're seeded, it's all about the matchups, but seeding matters because it depends on potential matchups and who you play against. So I guess that's my little opening rant, is that basketball coaches do care about where their team is seated, because it matters, especially the NCAA tournament. It matters about location. It matters about hosting games for high school sports. It matters who you play down the line. So I guess seeding matters. I'll leave it at that. And how have you been? On a lighter note.
I've been good. And to touch on your point, we're going to definitely talk about the Big Ten tournament, and seeding does matter. And just to kind of foreshadow that, if you're Illinois, you probably wanted to be the 10 seed instead of the 9 seed, because the 10 seed gets to possibly play Wisconsin in the second round. When you're in a 9 seed, you get Purdue. And Purdue's been playing some good basketball. Wisconsin a little bit shaky lately. If I'm Illinois, I'd rather been a 10 seed than a 9 seed. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Today's show is going to be great, Kevin. Wrapping up the Big Ten last week, and now the tournament. The bracket has come out. Wednesday starts for all the Big Ten tournament title marbles, not for the NCAA tournament. But you and I are also going to throw some nice little things out for our fans. We know we're getting a bunch of listeners, and we love it. So just because we like our listeners, we're going to do some extended shows throughout the week. Little 15 to 30-minute shows recapping the Big Ten day, previewing the upcoming matches. I'm actually pretty jacked up about that, Kevin.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we sit here and we do hour-long shows, and we talk about how we could go on for 3 hours, easily, about whatever has gone in just a week's time. And so to do little, 15 to 30-minute shows, like you said, throughout this week and into the weekend with the Big Ten tournament happening, it's right here. It starts Wednesday, ends Sunday. That's Selection Sunday. So going forward, starting Wednesday, I mean, today is Monday when we're recording, so who knows when you're listening to this. Could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that. But so going forward, starting Wednesday this week, it's, we plan on pushing shows on a very consistent basis, whether it's an hour, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's all about the Big Ten, whether it's about one single Big Ten team's, road. Once the bracket does get revealed for the NCAA tournament, we'll be recapping it all. And this week especially, like Troy said, we're going through every single matchup, every single, possibility that's out there. Every day we plan on giving you guys shows.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm excited about it, and hopefully there's a magical run. I really want there to be one. Not that if, I know you're a Purdue guy and they're seeded number 1. I have said this. I'm sticking to it. I don't think 1, 2, or 3 are winning this thing. I'm thinking a lower seed than 3 is going to win, and I hope there's that magical team that we can talk about on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure if it's going to be a day 1 Wednesday team when I look at the 4 teams involved, but it could be one of those teams that are playing for the first time on Thursday that can make a magical run to the Big Ten title game and possibly the Big Ten title. I'll tell you, Kevin, we try to figure these teams out. Every week we try to figure these teams out, and I'll tell you what, it's just I'm seeing some inconsistency from some teams. Some teams are playing very well going into the tournament, even though they may have dropped their last regular season game. There are teams that are playing some good basketball here in their last 5, and that's how I'm going to break it down when I talk today. Just looking at the past 5 games, not necessarily the past 10, because when you look at 10 games, when you go back 10 games, and I know the tournament selection committee does 10 games, but when you look at right now at the end of the regular season, Kevin, if I go back 10 games, that's almost going like 4 or 5 weeks back. And 4 or 5 weeks is a long time to be playing basketball. I'm going to concentrate on the last 5, which is the last week to 2 weeks, because I think that's what's really going to tell going into this tournament who's playing good basketball, who's not playing so good basketball, and who has a chance to win this darn thing. But, Kevin, before we get into the Big Ten, do you want to have any quick notes about the AP Top 25? Anything interesting catch your eye this week as far as the AP goes?
I actually have not looked at the newest Top 25, so I'm going to bring it up right now. But so yeah, I mean, like I said, to start the show, we do the show on Mondays. That's when we record, and Monday afternoon, that's when the new AP poll comes out. And so, I guess for this week, Gonzaga's still number 4, I think. Let me see here. Purdue's 13. That's the top Big Ten team, and then Wisconsin's down at 24 now. And Maryland's right behind them at 25. So you still got 3 Big Ten teams in there, just like the last.
Barely.
I think
barely.
Weeks. Yeah, exactly. Barely. We're 2 spots away from having 1 Big Ten team in the top 25. To go along that S curve, and the 1 through 4, the teams ranked 1 through 4 are your 1 seeds. The teams 5 through 8 are the 2 seeds. 9 through 12 are the 3. If you follow that out, Wisconsin's barely on the 6th line. That's if everything plays out perfectly, which it never does because of the selection committee's process of locating teams, and it matters on where your conference. You can't be a top 4 seed in the same region as another team in your conference. It has to be split up. So there are a bunch of little different intricacies of how it works and how teams are seeded. So it doesn't work out perfectly on that S curve like I just mentioned, but yeah, I mean, Wisconsin at number 24, Maryland at 25. That shows they're on that 6 to 7 seed line, if the AP was perfectly correct. And according to Joe Lunardi, it's kind of the same thing because there are still 7 teams in from the Big Ten. It's been that way for a few weeks now. But Purdue's a 4 seed according to Joe Lunardi. Then you have Wisconsin as a 6. Maryland's actually a 7. And Minnesota is also a 6. So Minnesota is ahead of Maryland in terms of Joe Lunardi's projections. And right now, realistically, I think Minnesota could be a more dangerous team than Maryland. I think they're a more complete team. I think they've got more bodies that are ready to play basketball than Maryland is. I think Maryland has Melo Trimble and a few talented freshmen. I think Minnesota is also a young team, but just has more depth, in my opinion. They're a very athletic team. So Minnesota's on that 6th line with Wisconsin, which is, I guess, crazy to me when I first looked at Lunardi's projected bracket, because when we started this show, or just about a month ago, Wisconsin was the number 7 team in the country according to the AP poll, and Minnesota, we had decided that there were 5 strong Big Ten teams getting into the tournament. Maybe you could find a 6 somewhere. Maybe magically 7 would make it, but we've been at 7 strong for a while now, and Minnesota was out of that top 5 just about a month ago. Now, a month later, Minnesota's on the same seed line, could be a 6 seed with Wisconsin. And Wisconsin was the top team in the Big Ten for a majority of the year, and then Purdue kind of vaulted over them. But it just shows how much can change over a month, and I think it points to your point where you can't really look, 10 games back and see how a team's doing. If they lost a couple games toward the back end of that 10-game stretch, but as of late they've won 4 or 5, or they won 5 straight, that last 5, I think, is a better indicator, like you mentioned, as opposed to 10, because 10 games ago, we're talking about January. So teams get better over the course of February, and obviously the start of March has happened. Still conference games are going on, Big Ten tournaments going on. Some of these teams are going to play 2, 3, 4 games, possibly 5 if you make that crazy run. So, yeah, looking at your last 5 games kind of indicates of who you are, not 10 games ago, going back to your point. So Purdue's a 4 seed right now, according to Lunardi. Wisconsin and Minnesota are 6s. Maryland a 7, Michigan 9, Northwestern a 9, Michigan State a 10. And then you got a couple teams in Iowa and Illinois on the first 4 out. So they're right there on the bubble. If they win 1 game, they could be in. If they win 2, it almost seems like a lock, as though they'll be in. But we're obviously going to break that down even more going forward in this show as we talk about the Big Ten tournament coming up.
Yeah, and it's going to be a fun time. I'll tell you what, Kevin, you mentioned Minnesota, and to be honest, I think they're the best. I'll put it this way. I think they're playing the best basketball in the league right now, outside of Purdue. I mean, I talk about the last 5, and for our show today, That's my indicator. Now, when you get to the selection committee, I understand the 10 because most of these teams have a conference tournament under their belt, which could be 2-3 games in there. You go back 10 there, now you're only going back 2, maybe 2.5 weeks. So there is a reason for them to say the last 10, but for this show, I definitely wanted to do the last 5. Minnesota in their last 5, 4-1. Before the loss, though, Kevin, here at the end of the season, they had an 8-game winning streak. They have been playing the most consistent basketball outside of Purdue for the last month. And Purdue has just been that other consistent team. I know you're a big Purdue guy this year. You love Purdue, what they're doing. They're 4-1 in their last 5. So when I look at it, you very well could see Purdue and Minnesota matching up, unfortunately, in the semifinal, not in the final. Kind of the short end of the stick for Minnesota, Kevin, where they are the 4 seed. And so if they win their first game, they get to get Purdue. But to me, that would be a huge game for Minnesota. If they can knock off Purdue in that semifinal game, woo, that would really do a lot. You might see them move up when you're talking about seeding in the NCAA tournament if they could knock off Purdue. But let's get right to it. There are 2 games on Wednesday, 4 teams. The bottom 4 teams in the Big Ten, 11 through 14, do not get a first-round bye. So I want to work our way forward that way, Kevin. Talk about the bottom of the tournament first, and then as we go through, we'll get to those top 4 seeds that have, and I'm air quoting, a double bye and don't play until Friday. But on Wednesday, you got a Nebraska team versus a Penn State team, 12 versus 13. Then you have 11, Ohio State, versus a team where I was cheering for NIT earlier in the year in Rutgers. They come in at 14, and they come bumbling into the tournament with 1-4 in their last 5, and they had a 6-game losing streak in there before they pulled off a win on the last regular season game against Illinois, which for Illinois sucks, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Rutgers versus Ohio State, Kevin, Nebraska versus Penn State. I'll just put it bluntly this way as we quickly go over these 2 games. I don't see either of these 4 teams getting to Friday.
No, I would agree. I don't think it would be insane to have a gritty Penn State team or a Nebraska team that gets hot for 2 games. Say Nebraska gets hot from 3, which they more than, are capable of. They've pulled off at least 3 Big Ten upsets, clear upsets, over these top 4 or 5 teams in the Big Ten over the course of the regular season. So can Nebraska beat Penn State? I kind of expect them to, I guess, kind of, sort of. Penn State coming into this has lost their last 5. We talk about looking at your last 5 going into the Big Ten tournament. Penn State's lost all of them. And Nebraska has lost 4 straight. So both of these teams are on the downward turn. But, yeah, can Nebraska beat Penn State with 3s and then get past a Michigan State team who's lost their last 2 and is really young and has injuries to 3 key guys this year? I think it's possible. I don't expect Nebraska to do that. I don't expect Penn State to do that. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And same with Northwestern. I think Northwestern's a solid team, but you got Ohio State and Rutgers. I'm going to personally choose Ohio State over Rutgers because I think they have more talent across the board. That to me isn't much of a question. But, again, Ohio State, they've got the talent to match up with Northwestern. It's not as though Ohio State doesn't have players. But I think Northwestern's a more solid team. I think they run their offense better. I don't think they go in as many lulls offensively. I think Northwestern plays better defense than Ohio State. But I don't think they're, that much more of a team. I think they're a better team as a whole, but I don't think the talent disparity between Northwestern and Ohio State or Michigan State's, lacking roster due to injury is insanely more talented. Obviously, you've got a couple guys, but, more talented / deeper than a hot Nebraska team. I think anything's possible, I guess, outside of Rutgers making a crazy run with these 4 teams. But, I'm with you that I expect Michigan State to beat either Nebraska or Penn State, and then I expect Northwestern to beat either Ohio State and Rutgers. So I would pick Nebraska to beat Penn State. I think, like I said, Penn State's can be gritty at times, but I like Nebraska's offense better. I think Nebraska can shoot it better from deep. So 2 teams on the downward turn. I just like the I guess, potential offense of Nebraska to beat Penn State and then to lose to Michigan State in the second round. And then in the other one, the other first-round game on Wednesday, you got Ohio State-Rutgers. Like I said, I think Ohio State's talent is much better than Rutgers' is. Not to say that Ohio State's crazy talented, but Rutgers is the bottom team in the Big Ten for a reason. But I also like Northwestern over Ohio State in that second round. So I'm with you. I don't think any of these four teams make it to Friday, the quarterfinal round.
Yeah, and, poor old Rutgers. We're going to have to go, and we're going to have to both agree on that one. And we're off to one of these amazing starts where we start agreeing with each other, Kevin. So I'm with you that Nebraska can get by Penn State. Now, Penn State, if they get hot from outside, though, they're similar teams in my mind. Penn State and Nebraska, very similar, and they're sitting in around the same place in the Big Ten tournament. But I just like the way Nebraska can turn it on a little bit more than Penn State. So I'm with you, Nebraska over Penn State, Ohio State over Rutgers, and then both of them get a pretty, I don't want to say favorable game, but they have a game where they can go in. Could they pull an upset on Thursday? And the answer is anything's possible. We found that out in the Big Ten this year. But let's take a look at Thursday's matchups, Kevin. Michigan-Illinois will be at the top of the bracket, 8-9, with the winner getting to face Purdue. So we'll talk about that game in a little bit. Michigan State, then, and they will play the winner of the Nebraska-Penn State game, as we just talked about. Then that all-important pivotal 7-10 matchup. We talked about it last week. That is the matchup where you look at the 7 and the 10 seeds, and you think, can one of these two teams make a run to that Big Ten tournament final? And I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag right now as to whether I believe they can or not. But you and I talked about that. That 7-10 matchup, even before the teams came out, we said either of those teams that are in that 7-10 game, should Wisconsin be the number 2 seed, that is a very favorable seeding, as I talked about in the beginning of the show, to be able to get to the semifinal. Then you have, that's Iowa versus Indiana, 7-10. Then you have that Northwestern game that you talked about, Northwestern versus Ohio State, Rutgers winner. Northwestern, Kevin, they've fallen down too. I mean, we look back to when we started this show, and the media love for Northwestern was huge. And I know the inside joke on this show that I was a Northwestern hater. I was just not a believer in the overall makeup of what they were going to do. And since then, they have stumbled to a 21-10 record. And we had talked about, should they have faltered here at the end of the season, but they've done enough in my mind, Kevin, by going 2-3 in their last 5 to at least get to that 20-win mark. It'll be hard to keep them out of the NCAA tournament. Had they faltered any more than that, and then lost in the first round of the Big Ten, we were talking about them possibly not even sniffing the NCAA tournament. But now they're at 21 wins. I know they have 10 losses. A first-round exit to me, I still think they're probably going to make the tournament should they falter to an Ohio State team. But again, I can tell you, I said no teams from that first 4 are going to play Friday, which means Northwestern will get that win to give them 22 and probably solidify a place in the NCAA tournament. But I want to start up top, Kevin. I want to start Michigan, Illinois. And you have two teams that are probably playing pretty good basketball right now. I know Michigan's 3-2 in their last 5. I know Illinois is 4-1, but they dropped the game. How did this happen, Kevin? They dropped the game to Rutgers. They dropped it to Rutgers. Last game of the season, before you go into the Big Ten tournament. How is that going to play emotionally on their minds? Can they put that behind them, prepare for a tough Michigan team at this point? I like what Illinois has done over their last 5. They've been playing good basketball, and that was a team, like I said, they probably wish they were the 10 seed. Maybe that's what they were trying to do. Maybe they were trying to lose to be the 10 seed.
Maybe they were. I talked at the beginning of the show about how seeding matters, and this is kind of why. I think that Iowa, as the 7th seed in this Big Ten tournament, they've been up and down. Their offense is definitely capable of scoring 80 on anybody, but at the same time, it's been inconsistent, and that's why they're the 7th seed in the Big Ten tournament. That's why they're outside the NCAA tournament, according to Joe Lunardi, going into this championship week, is because they've just been inconsistent. Michigan's a solid in, and they're the 8th seed in this Big Ten tournament. Iowa's the 7th seed, and Joe Lunardi has them clearly on the bubble. He's got them on the first 4 out. So for both, Iowa and Illinois, both are on the first 4 out. So whether Joe Lunardi's a little off and they're barely in, or if he's barely off and they're kind of, that 5th or 6th, 7th team on the outside looking in, with a win or two, teams ahead of them lose, you get, a good win or two, especially two, both of these teams. If Iowa wins 2 games, I think they're in the NCAA tournament. If Illinois wins 2 games, I think they're in the NCAA tournament. So both of these matchups, 8-9, 7-10, you're looking at the 7-10. I'm looking at 8-9 as much as the 7-10. But I'm with you that Wisconsin's more vulnerable than Purdue. So I think that the winner of Michigan-Illinois runs into a Purdue team that's, to me, been my favorite Big Ten team all year. I think they lose that game. But, regardless, for both Illinois and Indiana, this is it. I mean, you're clearly on the bubble. Joe Lunardi's never off by a mile. And I'm completely with them that Illinois at this point, they've had their struggles, but recently they won 4 straight and then lost at Rutgers. And so your question was, will they be able to bounce back? I think they would be able to, but I really do like Michigan. We talked 2 or 3 weeks ago about, if one of these top 3 teams in the Big Ten tournament doesn't win it, who would it be? And my pick immediately was Michigan because of how hot they can get from the outside. I think Mo Wagner is a player, pick and roll, pick and pop. He's become a guy that it seems like he shoots 50% from 3. I don't know his numbers as of late down the stretch, but he's gotten to be a much better player as the years gone on. He's a big guy who can stretch the floor. He seems really dangerous. Derek Walton, their point guard, Michigan's point guard the last 10 games, has been playing really well. So this is a very dangerous Michigan team as the 8th seed. So I think Illinois just kind of missed out because if they were the 10 seed, you get an Iowa team that's been shaky as opposed to a Michigan team who can put up 90 on anyone, it seems like. I think Michigan's offense is very dangerous because of how well they can shoot the 3. A lot of people talk about how, well, if this team gets their shots to fall, they're really good. Well, yeah, that's the case for anybody, but I think that for a team like Michigan who puts up a lot of 3s and can make those 3s, they're a good 3-point shooting team. It's not crazy to see Michigan go on a 2-3 game run where they just obliterate people because of how they're shooting the ball. I think that's different than a team like Northwestern, where if they make their shots, they're really good. Well, of course they are, but it's not common for Northwestern to go on hot streaks shooting the ball from deep. Michigan, it is common. That's why they became kind of this team out of nowhere. They were outside the NCAA tournament looking in, and then 2 weeks later they're like an 8 seed, according to Lunardi. So you can have those stretches of good play by Michigan, a team that can shoot from 3. I just think Illinois is outclassed here defensively and especially offensively, coming off a road loss to Rutgers, which they needed to win because they had won 4 straight. They were on the outside looking in, but if you win your last 5 and 6 of your last 7 and you beat Iowa before that, Illinois was looking pretty good. Right now they're 18-13, but they could have been 19-12. And so if you win a game in the Big Ten tournament and a few teams ahead of you lose, maybe they snuck in to that last 4 in. But right now I think they are on the outside looking in. I think Iowa's placed higher than Illinois in terms of what the selection committee thinks. Again, it's all what you think, how I view it. But I think Iowa has the upper hand on Illinois, according to the selection committee. And at this point, Illinois needs 2 wins to get in the NCAA tournament. And I think they run into a buzzsaw in Michigan. As crazy as it sounds, a buzzsaw, number 8 seed in the Big Ten. I think Michigan's playing really well as of late. I think their offense can't be stopped, and I'm really looking forward to Michigan playing Purdue in that Friday quarterfinal game.
Yeah, I don't think Illinois bounces back, Kevin. I know they had won 4 straight prior to this, but I know playing on the road is tough. Anytime you go on the road, it's tough, but it's Rutgers. And sorry, Rutgers fans that are listening, I'm not sure how many are Rutgers fans listening, if there are any. But I can't get on the Rutgers bandwagon that a team of Illinois' caliber loses to Rutgers at home. Rutgers is just not stacking up talent-wise against many teams in the Big Ten basketball-wise. And so for Illinois, that has to be demoralizing. And now you're looking at your tournament hopes as pretty much crumbled, because you have to then beat Michigan, then you have to beat Purdue. You can't go 1-1 in the Big Ten tournament and hope to make the NCAA tournament. The only way is if everybody else in front of you, all the wheels fall off the bus. And that's not going to happen. So my thought here is, emotionally, a loss to Rutgers, now they're going to have to put pressure on themselves, knowing they've got to get to the semifinals to have a shot. That doesn't even guarantee them a spot in the NCAA tournament. That's a lot of pressure, and I think you're now going to go in against the Michigan team. You make mistakes, they're going to capitalize, and Michigan, honestly, Kevin, I think is going to take care of Illinois pretty handily. It's a quiet Michigan team that we've talked about. We really haven't talked much about them on this show. And they come into the tournament not really impressive at 3-2 in their last 5, but when you look at the way they're playing, they're a team that if they got on this mini hot streak, and could they take Purdue down on Friday? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm with you. So now we're 3 for 3 in agreeing on who's going to win. This has to change, Kevin. This has to change. Let's go to the bottom game in this bracket. Michigan State's going to play who you and I think will be Nebraska, but they play the winner of Nebraska-Penn State. I had talked about it last week. After a win over Wisconsin, the Tom Izzo magic is back in March. Boop. I know you said it's 2 close road losses, but at the end of the day, there's still 2 losses. In years past, that scary Michigan State team probably would have pulled out one of those. Instead, they dropped both. Now, I know that it's on the road and they were close games, but from me catching some glimpses of it, reading about those games, again, this Michigan State team does not scare me. However, they got lucky. You talked about seeding. They get to play the darn winner of Nebraska and Penn State. Could Nebraska get hot from 3 and shoot the lights out? Well, certainly, but I don't think it happens. I don't think they're going to take care of Michigan State on Thursday. I'm going with Michigan State, and there's a funny feeling in my mind that we're now going to agree on 4 games, because I know you said before you didn't think any of the first 4 teams on Wednesday would make it. But to make it official, I'm going to turn it back over to you and give your outcome for this Michigan State against the winner of Nebraska-Penn State game.
Yep. You hit it on the head. I mean, I must say this, though, that before we get even deeper into this tournament, we're projecting out the Big Ten tournament, and before the show, we text throughout the week and about the show, about the Big Ten. Since we started the show, it's been all about basketball because football had just ended when we started this podcast, and so it's been all about basketball. And so we'll text throughout the week about topics we want to talk about, or a team, or a game that happened, or a last-second shot, or whatever. And so I guess with shows and podcasts and a ton of them, out on the internet now and being seen on TV, a lot of times you have co-hosts or, a team members on a show disagreeing or agreeing, to get conflict, agreeing more often than they should or disagreeing more often than they should to get that conflict and drama and to raise ratings. And we haven't talked 1 second about this Big Ten tournament since the bracket became official and came out. We didn't talk for a second about how deep Nebraska could go, how deep Michigan could go, how much we like Michigan, how much we hate Iowa, how much we don't like Northwestern. We haven't talked about anything. So we will never agree just to agree. We will never disagree just to disagree on this show. So going forward, we have not talked a second about this Big Ten tournament, and yet here we are, 4 games in. It's still early, though. I fully expect us to disagree somewhere, but 4 games in.
We're going to. I know we're going to.
Oh, yeah. But yes, I expect Michigan State to get past Nebraska in the second round on Thursday. The next game is that 7-10 matchup, that Iowa-Indiana, where the winner plays Wisconsin, and that's where things could get probably interesting, and that may be where we end up disagreeing. So number 7 seed Iowa takes on number 10 seed Indiana in the second round. Again, I think Iowa has to win 2 games. in this Big Ten tournament to make it official that they'll make the NCAA tournament. So I don't think it's out of the question. I think they're 2 games away. And this first game technically wouldn't be an upset over number 10 seed Indiana. So I personally, going on to that game, I do like Iowa to win. I think Iowa has the better defense. I think Indiana has been very inconsistent all year because of injuries, because of shots not falling, because of them only having one big man inside. I think Iowa's got potentially they definitely have a more consistent offense. I think defensively they can play it as well as Indiana can, which is not saying much. But I like Iowa going forward to beat Indiana. So what are your thoughts on that 7-10 matchup on Thursday?
Finally, we're going to disagree. And I'll tell you, of all the games, and I went through this bracket in my mind since it came out, all the games from Wednesday to Sunday, this is the one that I had the most internal conflict. Because Iowa comes into this game, Kevin, 4-1 in their last 5, a 4-game winning streak. Inconsistent maybe before that, but they come in hot. And then you have an Indiana team that, honestly, we were talking about them that they might not win another game in the Big Ten. We talked about that, and they slid, and they slid, and they slid. The thing is, they slid into the best spot possible, the 7-10 game. They've got healthy again. They got guys back. And I think that they can do enough to upset Iowa. This would be a huge upset. And I'm not picking it just because, they're going to, we need to have an upset. I've had internal conflict because I was actually playing very good basketball. This is a team that I think could win against Wisconsin, but I also think Indiana can take down Wisconsin. Now, I'm not saying that either of them are going to. I'm not foreshadowing that. But in this game, I just look at what Indiana has done. I know they're 2-3 in their last 5. They won their last regular season game. I just like them getting a little bit healthy, and I think they'll have enough to get by Iowa on Thursday to go into a matchup against Wisconsin. So there's our first disagreement. I think Indiana knocks off a very hot Iowa team and literally ruins their NCAA hopes. Because a loss by Iowa in this game, Kevin, and they are not in. There's no way they're getting in. So, unfortunately, for the Iowa fans listening in, call me names, do whatever you want, say I'm an old man that is losing his mind, because that actually could be fact instead of just somebody demeaning me. But I think Indiana, Kevin, them getting a little bit more healthy here at the end of the year, maybe going through the motions, trying to put things together over the past couple of games, there's just something. And you get those feelings inside when you look at teams that are closely matched up. And even though Indiana's been on that slide, you talked about it, some injuries through the course of that losing streak. The thing is, both of these teams have been inconsistent. But Iowa is consistent, and so this could be that crazy pick where you're going, my God, Troy, what are you thinking? But I think Indiana has enough to get by, at least on Thursday, to get against Wisconsin on that Friday matchup. So your quick thoughts here about how crazy I am picking Indiana over Iowa that has won 4 in a row and goes into the Big Ten tournament maybe as hot as any team. I think Indiana cools them down.
Yeah, it's not crazy at all. I mean, like you said, both these teams have been inconsistent throughout the year. Iowa's just put together a 4-game winning streak as of late. That's what's made Iowa, I think, before this 4-game winning streak, you had mentioned that, can the Big Ten possibly get an 8th team? And if so, hey, this Iowa team, I guess, could. But at that time, they were coming off a 3-game losing streak. And so I was like, no, there's no way Iowa can do it. Then after the 3-game losing streak, they beat Indiana. So they beat Indiana on February 21st. So just a couple weeks ago, they beat Indiana, 96-90. That's the type of game we could be seeing on Thursday. The second-round matchup, the first game for both 7-seeded Iowa, 10-seeded Indiana. They both just got that first-round bye by staying out of the bottom 4 of the Big Ten. And so this is their first game. It could be a rematch. Well, it is a rematch, but it could be exactly like we're predicting, where I said that both these offenses are potentially, pretty dangerous. Both can hit the three from deep. We've talked about James Blackman on this show numerous times and how he's, realistically, potentially the most dangerous player in the Big Ten if his shot is on. If his shot is on, he can get to the paint whenever he wants to, and if his shot is on, he can score 30. So Indiana's got that difference maker where you can see Indiana possibly going on a 2-game, 3-game, 4-game stretch in this Big Ten tournament. And the reason I say that's possible is because, especially looking at all these leagues, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, all these leagues, the one league that's kind of got a majority of teams just bunched up in the middle, and, Maryland's been inconsistent as of late, and Minnesota had an 8-game winning streak, but before that, they were not even an NCAA tournament team. They had lost 5 straight. Michigan State's the 5 seed in the Big Ten. They just lost 2 straight to end the year. Michigan, an 8 seed. They're dangerous, but they've been inconsistent. Illinois has been dangerous, but they've been inconsistent. I guess basically all these teams, and Wisconsin, up until yesterday, Wisconsin had lost 4 out of 5 and 6 out of 8. Out of their last 8 games, they've lost 6. So before yesterday. So all these teams are capable of being beaten, and I think Purdue has separated themselves personally, but the rest of these teams, 2 through probably about 11, they all, to me, don't have that superior talent to say, okay, obviously Wisconsin's going to beat Iowa or Indiana, or obviously Maryland's going to beat Northwestern on Friday. You can't really say that because the talent disparity is not that great. So I guess to make my long point short, I don't think you're crazy for thinking Indiana can go on a run. I think Indiana can absolutely beat Wisconsin. I think Iowa can beat Wisconsin. I think teams seeded 1 through 11 can beat Wisconsin in this Big Ten because of not necessarily how lackluster Wisconsin is, but because there are, to me, I think Ohio State's a quality team that's just been very inconsistent this year. But from a talent perspective, I don't think the talent disparity between Wisconsin or Maryland and Minnesota is that much different than Ohio State. It's just been a matter of coaching and keeping things together. Wisconsin's done a better job than Ohio State has. But talent-wise, I don't think it's crazy to say that Ohio State matches up with Wisconsin, and talent-wise, they're not a ton far off. So I think the Big Ten's just got a cluster in the middle of its conference. A lot of these teams can be dangerous if they get hot. Indiana's certainly one of them.
Well, I think the word lackluster for Wisconsin is probably a compliment, Kevin. For those that listen in that are Badger fans, know that I am a diehard Wisconsin Badger fan. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. I love Bucky Badger, but I've called them robotic. They're not playing up to their potential. And we're going to go over this Northwestern game, then we're going to move into Friday's games. But this Wisconsin team, Kevin, I've talked about it in the Big Ten. There's 2 teams that have rosters and that make up a roster that could give you a good run in the NCAA tournament. Wisconsin was one of them. However, just having it on paper does not equate to court time. And Wisconsin has not been playing very good basketball. We'll talk about that here in a couple minutes when we talk about Friday's matchups. Let's move into Northwestern, winner of Ohio State Rutgers. We both like Ohio State moving past Rutgers, which means that if you're a betting person, take Rutgers, because Rutgers will now win because Kevin and I agreed on this game. But they face a Northwestern team, Kevin, and a team in Northwestern that basically has been an average team over the past even 5 games, 10 games, however far back you want to go. Basically since the beginning of the year, they've been an average team. I know they got off to a blazing start in the Big Ten, and everybody was jumping on the Northwestern bandwagon. Ooh, Northwestern's going to make their first NCAA tournament. They're going to be seeded high. Well, they're going to fall in that 10-seed area, Kevin. And, when you look at it, they're just average right now. But they're going to play against an Ohio State team, in my mind, that I don't think can handle the pressure that Northwestern applies defensively. You talked about it earlier in the show. I think Northwestern is a very good defensive club. Sometimes they struggle offensively, a.k.a. they sound a lot like Wisconsin, that can play good defense and cannot consistently score. To me, that's what Northwestern is. They're a blueprint, to be honest, in my mind, of a Wisconsin team. They play very good defense, but sometimes they can go on long scoring droughts, and we all know that a basketball game is made up of many streaks. I talked about this before on the show. 12-2 run, 14-2 run. When you go on those runs, or you give up one of those runs, do you have enough to come back and sustain your own run of 10-2 or 14-2? I don't think Ohio State will have enough to be able to come back from a Northwestern run, because I'm going to point defense in this game, Kevin. I'm going to say Northwestern defensively wins this game. And this could be, in my mind, we just talked about Iowa, Indiana being 90-80 or 88-82. I think this Northwestern-Ohio State game is going to be more like 58-54, 60-52, something of that nature.
Yeah, I expect it to be in the 60s. It's funny that you bring that up, though, because I was going to excuse me. I was going to talk about Northwestern's defense, and over the last 5 games, they haven't given up 70 points to anybody. Last time they did was 6 games ago when they played Maryland, and Melo Turnbull had 31 points, 32 points, something like that. They lost to Maryland by 10 after beating Wisconsin on the road. That's when everyone really solidified Northwestern's NCAA tournament bid. They started off 18-4 this year, and then they lost 2 straight. So they went to 18-6, and then they won at number 7 Wisconsin in the middle of February. That's without their top scorer in Lindsey. So Northwestern had gotten this huge win, 19-6, and then since then, after that game, they gave up 74 to Maryland. And so before that, at Purdue, February 1st was the last time they gave up 80, and it was exactly 80. That might have been the only time this team gave up 80. Actually, now that I'm looking back, yes, unless my eyes are deceiving me, it's the only time Northwestern gave up 80 this year was when they gave up 80 at Purdue. So that's the only time they gave up 80. Maryland put up 74 on them. But so going back to Ohio State and this matchup, Northwestern played at Ohio State in late January, and it was 74-72, which surprised me because I'm with you that it wouldn't surprise me if this one was in the 50s. But I'll say it gets to the 60s. That's where Northwestern's played their last 5 games. Both of them and their opponent have scored in the 60s in the last 5 games. Outside of at Illinois when they lost by 16, Northwestern only put up 50 points. So that's over their last 5, they're 2-3. Over the last 6, they're 2-4. Over the last 9, they're 3-6. This team has not been great whatsoever, and that's why we talked about early on the show and last week about how this team realistically, even though nobody's talking about it, could miss the NCAA tournament. Luckily, they beat Michigan 67-65 on this past Wednesday. They had a Hail Mary pass and got a layup out of it to win the game. Otherwise, it was going into overtime. If they had lost that game, then Illinois would have swept Northwestern. So that's another bubble team. So, okay, who do we take if you're the selection committee, Illinois or Northwestern? Illinois could possibly have the upper hand because they just beat them by 16 points to end the year, and Illinois swept them. And Northwestern could have been 2-8 over the last 10, lose in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. Their last 10 would have been atrocious. Luckily, they won against Michigan. So that saved Northwestern completely, in my opinion. But still looking at this Ohio State matchup, I expect it to be in the 60s. But like you, I agree with you that I expect Northwestern to come out on top because I trust their offense more. Realistically, I think Chris Collins has done a great job with Northwestern and taken the program to a different level, especially athletically. You can tell that Northwestern's a tournament team when you just look at them playing on the court. I think eye test is huge, and I think Northwestern passes that. They're definitely a tournament team. They're a solid team who has athletes. They don't necessarily have a great big. They don't necessarily have outstanding guards, but they're just very solid. They've got 7 or 8 guys that are very solid. They're all athletes. They can contend and compete with teams. That's why they play the second-best defense in the Big Ten, both statistically and eye test-wise. I think, like you, I'm with you that, to me, if I had to describe Northwestern in short, it's a less talented version of Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's got 3 of the best players in the Big Ten potentially, in Koenig, Hayes, and Happ, and then Northwestern doesn't have anyone necessarily that talented. But Lindsey's a great scorer, and they've got the depth to compete with anybody, the athletes to defend anybody. So I like Northwestern to beat Ohio State in the 60s and move on to play Maryland on Friday.
There we go. So then we've just wrapped up Thursday's games. I'll recap quickly. We both like Michigan. We both like Michigan State. We both like Northwestern. And the difference, you like Iowa, I like Indiana. That really, though, Kevin, is a toss-up game. But it's that 7-10 matchup that we've talked about to go up against a Wisconsin team that has been very inconsistent and has underachieved all year. They were a team that vaulted to 7th in the country, and ever since then just losing games, playing mediocre basketball. But on the top bracket, Kevin, probably the most interesting game on Friday. Number 1, Purdue. And then you have number 4, well, you have Purdue and then Minnesota in the top. And then you have Purdue against, we are saying, Michigan, which would be a very interesting game. And then you have Minnesota against Michigan State. So we have 1 versus 8, 4 versus 5 in the top. And that's where I want to stop there. I'm not going to go to the bottom yet because I'll give my quick prediction. I think this is chalked. You're going to see Purdue win. You're going to see Minnesota win. So that in the semifinal game, in my mind, the hottest team in the Big Ten right now, Minnesota, outside of Iowa. But I think Minnesota's playing the best basketball of anyone outside of Purdue with their long winning streak. Unfortunately, we talk about seeding, Kevin. This is the game that I would have loved to see in the final. Purdue versus Minnesota would have been a great Big Ten final. Unfortunately, the way the seeding works out, Minnesota's got to play Purdue in the semifinal. So when you look at it, I'll quickly give my thoughts. Purdue against Michigan, I think it's going to be a tough game. I think Michigan will hang in this game. By no means will it be a blowout. I just think Purdue is too big inside. I think Purdue is going to get those defensive rebounds when they need them. So if Michigan misses, they're one and done. Purdue is going to sustain the runs. So I'm not going to even say they handily beat Michigan, but I think Purdue is just a better team. And I think inside, the bigs are going to do the job against Michigan. So Purdue will move on. And Minnesota, Kevin, is just playing really good team basketball. I can't bet against them against Michigan State. There's no Tom Izzo magic, and I know I keep bringing this up, but I think Minnesota handles Michigan State. Could be close at times, but Minnesota, in my mind, is just a more complete team than Michigan State right now, and that's going to set up a showdown in the semifinals, Minnesota against Purdue, and oh, what a game that's going to be.
Yes, it would be. It really would be a great game. The problem is that I actually disagree with you, and I've been going back and forth on this potential matchup because, like you, I fully expect Michigan State to beat Nebraska on Thursday in the second round. That'll be Michigan State's first game. So I guess before I get into Michigan State and Minnesota on Friday, I'll say that, yes, Michigan beats Illinois. No question about that. Setting up Purdue against Michigan on Friday. That's Purdue's first game. Exactly what you said. Purdue's got the bigs. We've talked about it on this show numerous times that Swanigan is probably the best player in the Big Ten. He's got a shot at winning player of the year because he's got 25 double-doubles this year. It's the most in Big Ten history over the last 20 years at least. I'm not sure how far back that goes, but at least over the last 20 years, he's got the most double-doubles of any Big Ten player. He's got 25 of them. He averages, I think it's 18 and 12. It might be more than that now, but the last time I checked, he averaged 18 and 12. If there's a downfall to Michigan, and this is why Michigan is an 8 seed in the Big Ten tournament, and yet they could be a 9 seed or 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, is because of how hot and cold they get. I think Michigan's offense is potentially off the charts. I think if there's a team outside of the top 3, realistically outside of the top 2, I think Michigan's more dangerous than Maryland. That's just me. But if there's a team outside the top 3 to win this tournament, I think it's Michigan. But yes, Purdue's bigs are going to absolutely control the glass. Michigan loses the rebounding battle against just about anybody. And when you throw in a 7-2 guy in Haas alongside Swanigan, Big Ten's leading rebounder, who just eats up double-doubles and rebounds on a consistent basis, Purdue's going to own the boards. And so Michigan's going to have one of those 11 of 20 from 3 games to beat Purdue. And that's what makes Michigan dangerous because they can do it. They've got the 3-point shooters to do it. They've got mismatches out on the perimeter. And like I said, with Wagner inside doing pick and pops, he's a big who can stretch the floor, can pull Swanigan away from the basket, can pull Haas away from the basket. Michigan's got the blueprint. They can do it. But I expect Purdue to win because of that rebounding battle and complete mismatch on the boards. So I like Purdue going forward to get to the semifinal round. I like Michigan State beating Nebraska. We talked about that, setting up number 4 Minnesota against number 5 Michigan State on Friday. This is where we differ. I have Michigan State beating Minnesota. I think Minnesota, like you said, is the more complete team. I think they have not been decimated by injuries. I think their best players have not been missing games, missing the entire year, like Michigan State's front court. Michigan State's front court coming into the season was supposed to have 2 guys that never played a single game because of injuries. So that's why Michigan State has been lackluster this year. That's why they're not necessarily the number 5 seed in the Big Ten. I don't think they're that fantastic, but this is a down year in the Big Ten, so Michigan State's gotten through it. I think they've got the talent to do it. I think they can beat a Minnesota team who's just, again, kind of rock solid. I think they're a lot like Northwestern, but they've got a lot more ability offensively. I think they've got probably better athletes than Northwestern does. I think Minnesota's got the athletes to play with anybody in the country, realistically, but they don't have that necessarily firepower. I like their point guard. Minnesota's big. When he plays, I'm blanking on his name right now, but when he plays and doesn't get into foul trouble, that's when Minnesota's really dangerous. That's when they went on their 8-game winning streak. The problem is he got in foul trouble, and he played, I don't know how many minutes against Wisconsin, but that's how Minnesota's last game going into the Big Ten tournament, they lost at Wisconsin by 17. They were up by 2 at halftime, but because he got in foul trouble, they couldn't contain Wisconsin. They ended up scoring 49 points against Wisconsin. So that's the last game Minnesota has played going into this Big Ten tournament. Now they have a huge stretch off. And so Michigan State gets to get not necessarily a gimme game against Nebraska or Penn State, but they're a better team. So Michigan State's going to have a game under their belts where they're comfortable in this atmosphere, and they're playing a Minnesota team who's not fantastic. They're just playing really well outside of the Wisconsin game. So I think Michigan State matches up with Minnesota talent-wise for sure. They don't have the depth, in my opinion, because of injury, but I like Michigan State's Nick Ward on the inside. He's going to be by far the biggest player. Minnesota's big, who I can't seem to remember his name. He's only 6'6". He's their leading rebounder. He averages over 8 boards a game, so he gets it done, but he's only 6'6". Nick Ward's 6'9", 6'10". So I expect Michigan State to win the battle on the inside. I like Michigan State's talent on the outside. I think Minnesota has the better depth, but I like Michigan State to match up with Purdue on Saturday. Unlike you think Minnesota and Purdue are the best 2 teams in the Big Ten playing right now, and they match up in the semifinals, which can more than certainly happen. But I like Michigan State because of that extra game, because Minnesota had just lost one where they scored 49. I think Michigan State goes into Friday's game against Minnesota more comfortable and ready to play a game than Minnesota is.
Or you're just buying into Tom Izzo magic. Or that's what you're doing.
That too.
Very well. I know you're being like that closet guy. You don't want to come out and say Tom Izzo magic. But, that's my first thought. You're betting with Tom Izzo and his magic. And to be honest, Kevin, I wouldn't be mad if he did. Because we've talked about Tom Izzo in tournament time. And for some reason, he gets his guys to play well. I just think this is Minnesota. They're playing well. I think that's where they're going to go. It's nice that we disagree. But that would be, even the Michigan State-Purdue game. So now we're going to have to talk about different games. Let's move to the bottom part of this bracket, Kevin. This is where if I'm a team seeded, not 2 or 3, so if I'm 7 or 10 or I'm 6 and, it would be 11 Ohio State, I'm licking my chops today when I look at the bracket. I'm licking my chops going, if I can just win on Thursday, I get a chance to take down, air quoting, Goliath. 2 and 3. You got Wisconsin and Maryland. In my mind, Kevin, both of these teams are ripe for the picking. They're very ripe for the picking. So we think Indiana, or I think Indiana. You think Iowa. I think Indiana plays Wisconsin. And you brought up the name. I didn't bring it up against Iowa. but I'm bringing it up against Wisconsin. Mr. Blackman, like you said, if he gets hot, he can give any team fits. We talked about Maryland riding the coattails of Trimble. That's what Indiana does. But I think Indiana has a better supporting cast than Maryland. Indiana, in my mind, Kevin, they have underachieved. If I'm an Indiana fan, I'm looking at a 10 seed going, man, what in the heck have you guys done this year? But I also said they've gotten a little bit more healthy. They haven't been playing great basketball. But I think Blackman lights up the scoreboard against Wisconsin, who has struggled at times defensively. But I look at this team, and I look at Indiana taking down Wisconsin to go into the semifinal round. Wisconsin, one and done in the Big Ten tournament, Kevin. I think Blackman lights them up. And then in the bottom half of this bracket, I know we joked about me being a Northwestern hater early on in this show. Well, guess what, Northwestern fans? Pat me on the back. I think your Northwestern Wildcats take down Maryland. I think they suffocate Trimble. I don't think the supporting cast, I think the stage will be too big in the Big Ten tournament. I think Northwestern gets by Maryland. So both 2 and 3 go down in this tournament, Kevin, and you're seeing a number 10 Indiana squad play a number 6 Northwestern squad in the bottom half of this tournament in the semifinal game.
Very well could happen. I'm with you. I'll just fast forward the very bottom part of this Big Ten tournament bracket where we both think Maryland's going to play Northwestern on Friday. And I'm with you. I agree with you that Northwestern will pull the upset. And Northwestern is the more solid team. They're the more experienced team. They will, again, have a game under their belt, unlike Maryland. Just like I like Michigan State over Minnesota, I think having that one game under your belt, that game to give you confidence because you're going to win it, you're the better team, you're going to get in the right habits, you're going to have that atmosphere, you're going to have that game in Washington. This game is being played in D.C. That's where this Big Ten tournament is being held. And so Northwestern will get acclimated to the tournament environment. They've got a good coach. They've got good depth. They've got a more amount of solid guys than Maryland has. And so Maryland's got the best player in Melo Trimble. Maryland versus Northwestern. They've got the best player, no doubt about it. He's going to be in the NBA. Indiana's James Blackman's going to be in the NBA. They're both going to be in the NBA. They're both supremely talented. But I think Northwestern's got the better team than Maryland. I think I like their coaching better. I like almost everything about them better, more than Maryland. Maryland's got some stud freshmen that will be good next year. This year, they're still freshmen. They're going to not be playing until Friday, and Northwestern will have played a game where they get confidence under their belt. So I like Northwestern over Maryland. And Iowa against Wisconsin, I like Wisconsin over Iowa. I think Wisconsin's the more solid team. I think Iowa's got potentially the better offense. Although realistically, if you mention the top 3 players in this game, they're probably all coming from Wisconsin. Peter Jock from Iowa, again, will be in the NBA. It's another NBA guy. So Jock and Blackman are playing each other on Thursday in the second round. I think that's great. I think it'll be interesting to see. I like Blackman's talent better, but I like Iowa's personnel better over Indiana. Again, that has to do with injuries. But Indiana and Wisconsin, like you said, Blackman can light it up and absolutely pull that upset. But whether Wisconsin plays Iowa or Indiana on Friday, their first game, I just think Wisconsin's a more disciplined team. They're by far the better defensive team. So I think they will have their heads on straight. When they play good basketball, they kill teams, realistically. You can downplay Wisconsin as much as you want. You know, they've won 2 of their last 7 games. They're 2-5 in their last 7. They've played 1 good half against Maryland and won, and they've played 1 good half against Minnesota and won. They've played 2 good halves of basketball in the last 7 games. But I do like Wisconsin to beat either Indiana or Iowa on Friday. So I'm with you on Northwestern getting by into the semifinal round, but I like Wisconsin as well.
Nice. We're starting to disagree. So now we've got a little bit of a dilemma because it's not we're going to be talking about the same game. But I'm looking at my matchup in the semifinal as Purdue versus Minnesota, and then I'm looking at Indiana versus Northwestern. So I'm looking at the time. And, again, time doesn't really matter on our podcast. So hopefully the fans listening in, we're not really extending this more than we have to. But I look at Purdue, Minnesota, Kevin, and I'm holding strong that one of the top 3 seeds is not going to win the Big Ten tournament. I like Purdue. I think they're playing good basketball, but I also think Minnesota's playing good basketball. They've just taken care of business. I know they dropped the last game of the season. They only put up 49 points. But when I look at this matchup, I'm looking at a Purdue team, to be honest, when I look at it, Kevin, I'm not saying that they're not going to care. They're a very proud team. They're going to go out and they're going to play. But I think Minnesota's still going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder, trying to prove themselves. And I think they play very good team basketball. I think this is a game that you're going to see. It's going to be a scratch 'em, claw 'em, physical type game. And I know Minnesota is oversized against those Purdue bigs, but I like Minnesota. I just think when we're talking about a magical run, and I foreshadowed me talking about a magical run, this is the magical run we're talking about. We're talking about Minnesota, a team that we were not even talking about a month ago, finds themselves in the Big Ten championship game. And then on the bottom bracket, I have it all discombobbled. I've got 2 and 3 losing against Indiana and Northwestern. And now, am I going to stick on the Northwestern bandwagon? Well, you know what, Kevin? Yes, I am. I think Northwestern, as much as I didn't believe in them halfway through the season, I think I'm going to point again in the postseason to defense. Northwestern plays much better defense than Indiana. And I know they have Blackman, but much like they did against Tremble against Maryland, I think Northwestern can do the same thing against Blackman, and I don't think he has a supporting cast. You talk about Lindsey at Northwestern, I think they do just enough to get to the final. So I think you have a Big Ten final, Minnesota versus Northwestern. I know I'm off my rocker. I know I'm out in left field thinking that Minnesota and Northwestern, who would have thought those 2 teams are in the Big Ten tournament title? Well, old man Troy, that's his thought.
I can't believe you picked Northwestern to beat Indiana. I give you credit for, picking Northwestern over Ohio State. That's one thing. Picking Northwestern to beat Maryland, I've been really down on Maryland this year. You haven't been as outspoken on Maryland as me, but you picked Northwestern over Maryland, and now James Blackman gets hot in the Big Ten tournament, takes down Iowa, takes down Wisconsin, and then falls to Northwestern. So you're drinking the Kool-Aid for Northwestern now. You were a quote-unquote hater a month ago, and I was a fan of Northwestern. And now a month later, I like Northwestern to pull off an upset over Maryland. And if they played Indiana, I would pick Northwestern as well. So I'm with you there. But you're drinking more Northwestern Kool-Aid than I ever have, it seems like. But I'll
the purple kind. It's the purple Kool-Aid. Sure.
It's the purple Kool-Aid. Okay. So we've got old man Troy talking about the purple Kool-Aid over an hour past this show. So we're going into extra time. Doesn't matter. It's the Big Ten tournament. We've got shows for you all week. This is the first one. We're projecting out our Big Ten tournament bracket. And at this point, I like Wisconsin over Northwestern. Again, you don't think Wisconsin gets there. So I guess that's my quick question to you before we get to the final. I think Northwestern loses to Wisconsin. Do you think Wisconsin would beat Northwestern if that matchup happened? Do you like Northwestern to get past Wisconsin too? Do you think Northwestern's set no matter what for the Big Ten final, or would you like Wisconsin at that point? So at the bottom, I've got Wisconsin coming out, and I'm being boring, and I'm picking Purdue over Michigan State. You said Purdue, Minnesota in the semifinal. I like Purdue over Minnesota. Like you said, the bigs, they would be a complete mismatch for Minnesota. And then even against Michigan State, Purdue's got the bigs to contend with literally anyone in the country. It's not even the Big Ten. They've got Haas, like I said, who's 7-2, and they've got Swanigan. Both will probably be in the NBA. Swanigan for sure. Swanigan's had 25 double-doubles. He's easily the Big Ten Player of the Year, potential National Player of the Year. So I like Purdue to get past either Minnesota or Michigan State because they're just the better team. I've liked them since day one of this season. day one of this podcast. I think Purdue goes on to play Wisconsin. But so going forward, before the final game, do you think Wisconsin would beat Northwestern, or is Northwestern destined to play in the Big Ten title game?
No, Wisconsin would beat Northwestern. Again, it's playing out into how I've predicted my games.
Yep.
I think Wisconsin, with their layoff, I know they played a great second half, the last game of the year, but when I look at it, I think Wisconsin will struggle against Indiana. Now, if it's Wisconsin-Northwestern, at the end of the day, the Wisconsin team has the three big guys, Canning, Happ, and Hayes. They have three guys that can literally take over a game. Northwestern doesn't have that. Indiana basically has one guy, Blackman. You shut him down, you can get by them. You shut down Trimble at Maryland, you can get by Maryland. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the supporting cast of either of those teams. They don't have the supporting cast that Wisconsin has. I just think Wisconsin stumbles in their first game just because of the inconsistent play that I've seen all year from Wisconsin. I have zero confidence in Wisconsin right now. Can they turn it around? We thought before, when they had another one of these second halves, that they would, and they just went on and lost more games. I just think Wisconsin is not having any team chemistry right now. But to answer your question, I think Wisconsin would get by Northwestern. So for your pick there, hey, I'm good with that. At the top, let's say it was the Purdue-Michigan State game. I agree with you, Kevin. I think that Purdue can battle on the boards with any team in the country because of their bigs. But again, I'm drinking crazy stuff, and it's not even alcoholic stuff. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the Kickstart that I drink. But I look at, could Purdue and Wisconsin meet in the final? Yes, they could. This is the Big Ten tournament. And the reason for my craziness, I think, is because of the inconsistency that I've seen all year and the fact that any team can beat any other team on any given day. Purdue, even in some wins, has struggled, and I think that they are able to be defeated. I don't think any of these teams in the tournament are untouchable, and that's why I looked at the early exit for Purdue. So your final, Purdue versus Wisconsin. My final, Minnesota versus Northwestern. I think Minnesota wins it. I think Minnesota, finally the Kool-Aid has worn off. The Kool-Aid, the jug is empty, and Minnesota celebrates as Big Ten tournament champions.
I've got a couple points for you. I am with you that if Minnesota beats Purdue, that they will beat anyone on the bottom of the bracket, whether it's Wisconsin, Maryland, Northwestern, Iowa, Indiana, or the two that won't make it to Friday. I think that Minnesota, if they get past Purdue, will win the Big Ten tournament. So I'm with you there. They're more than capable of beating Michigan State. Michigan State's lost 2 straight. Minnesota's the deeper team. They've got the athletes to handle Michigan State. That's not an issue. Minnesota's got the better, probably overall team than Michigan State does. I'm just, like you said, drinking, believing in the Tom Izzo magic. Quick point, I guess I'm a Duke fan, and I think Tom Izzo is a better coach than Coach K. That's something that probably no Duke fan would ever admit, but I think Tom Izzo is a better coach than Coach K, and I'm a Duke fan. Again, I'm a Duke fan. I'm not a Big Ten lover. I'm not a Michigan State guy. I don't care. I think Tom Izzo is a better coach than Coach K, personally. I think he's the best coach in college basketball. But anyway, also, the second point that I wanted to get to before my little matchup of 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten tournament, second point is that if there is a team on the top half of this bracket, Purdue, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, Michigan State, Nebraska, Penn State, if there's a team that doesn't really care, it's Purdue. They're the number 1 seed. They won the Big Ten regular season. They won it by 2 games, I believe. I'm checking right now. They won it by 2 games. They were 14-4 in conference. Wisconsin and Maryland were 12-6. So they have established that they're the best team in the Big Ten over the course of the regular season. We both believe they're the best team probably overall, but you like Minnesota going forward, and I'm with you that Minnesota could absolutely beat Purdue. I think Michigan State could beat Purdue. Like I just said, Purdue, if there's one team realistically in this whole bracket, not even top half, but the entire Big Ten tournament, if there's a team that doesn't care, it's Purdue. They won the Big Ten regular season by 2 games. They're way more than comfortably in the NCAA tournament. they're around that 4 or 5 seed range. Even if they lose on Friday, their first game, they're a 5 seed, maybe at worst a 6 seed, but probably not. They're probably a 4 or 5 seed. They could be a 3 if they win this thing and teams ahead of them lose in the NCAA tournament, but there's not too much wiggle room for Purdue. So a hungry Minnesota team, a hungry Michigan State team, a hot Nebraska team, a hot Michigan team, an Illinois team that needs to win on Friday to get in the NCAA tournament, they could all beat Purdue, realistically. I don't think Penn State would. I think a hot Nebraska team could, just because of the carrying level and potential of Nebraska shooting the 3. So I think anything's possible. Getting to my third point, I guess, I've got 3 of them before I get into my final game, that I'm with you, that this entire Big Ten season has been kind of a question mark, because you've got Purdue, who kind of separated themselves, I guess, but Wisconsin was on top for a while, then they fell off. Maryland looked like a really strong team, then they lost 3 straight. Northwestern has looked really good at times, then as of late, they're like 3-6 in their last 9 or something ridiculous. Iowa and Indiana can both put it in, but they've had injuries and have been inconsistent. All these teams have been inconsistent, basically. Purdue's been at the top for the entirety of it. Wisconsin's been in the top 3. Maryland's been in the top 3 forever. But they've had their lulls. And so I guess I'm with you that if there is a complete crazy shakeup this week going forward, it's in the Big Ten, because the Big Ten has Purdue on top and then a bunch of teams who have talent but have been inconsistent. So any of these teams who are hungry enough can upset Purdue, can beat anybody, because the talent disparity, it just isn't there, in my opinion. So I'm with you that out of any league, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, Pac-12, you're not going to have the number 4 and number 6 teams in the final unless it's the Big 10, because the Big 10 is just that wide open. So you're not crazy, you're not off your rocker, you're not drinking, well, you're drinking something, but who knows what you're drinking. But if something crazy is to happen, it's in the Big 10. So Minnesota playing Northwestern, I like Minnesota in that matchup as well, if it happens. I'm being boring. I'm saying the top 2 teams make it. Purdue versus Wisconsin. I like Purdue. I've liked them all year. Wisconsin's been the team on top of the Big Ten for most of the year, but I've stuck with Purdue. I'm sticking with them here. I think Purdue's got the better bigs. I think they're more of a complete team. They've got better outside shooters. They've got as much, probably a little bit more depth than Wisconsin does athletically. They match up with Wisconsin just fine. I think Purdue's the most complete team in the Big Ten. I've said it all year, and I'll stick with it here. If there's a team to get to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4 from the Big Ten, it's Purdue. I just think they're the best overall team, and I'm hoping that their coach and players believe that this Big Ten tournament matters, because if not, they can get upset to basically anybody outside of Penn State and Rutgers. But I buy into their hunger and actually caring and really proving that they're the best team in the Big Ten and possibly getting a number 3 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Sounds like a plan, buddy. We have just exhausted our time today. That was a pretty in-depth show about the Big Ten tournament and the breakdown. Enjoyed it a lot. Like I said to everyone listening in the beginning, Kevin and I are going to have some mini shows throughout the week. Not sure when we're going to do them. We still haven't decided on the actual time, but the Big Ten tournament starts on Wednesday. You want to be vanilla? You want to say 1 versus 2, youngster? There's nothing wrong with that. As you get older and you start drinking, I figured out why I like Northwestern. My Kickstart can is purple. I am drinking a grape Kickstart, and it is purple. So maybe that is why Northwestern has been on my mind. But all is said and done, we'll find out how this all shakes out. The tournament starts on Wednesday. Kevin and I will get back with you later in the week. Hope you enjoyed the show today. For the youngster, Kevin Cunningham, I am the old man, Troy Otradovec. You can find us on Twitter at KidCunny or at TroyRobert967. Hope you enjoyed the show today. We'll talk to you later in the week.